Have you lost something? Maybe it was a person. Maybe it was a version of yourself you used to believe in. Maybe it was a plan one you have built for years that collapsed overnight into something you didn't recognize. And in the rubble of that loss, something happened that nobody warned you about. Everyone left. Not all at once. Not dramatically. They just, drifted. One by one. The people who cheered when you were rising went quiet when you started falling. The friends who celebrated your confidence disappeared when doubt moved in. Even the ones who said, "I'll always be here," they were here, just not in the way you needed. And now it's quiet. You wake up to silence. You sit with your thoughts longer than you're comfortable with. You scroll through your phone and see that nobody called, nobody checked in, and a voice inside you says, "Something must be wrong with me." Here is what that voice gets wrong. The silence isn't abandonment. The silence is selection. And what has been selected, if you are brave enough to survive it, is you. Chapter 1. The Myth of Belonging. The lie you were sold since childhood. From the moment you were old enough to understand language, the world handed you a story. You need people to survive. You are nothing without your tribe. Isolation is dangerous. Loneliness is weakness. The one who walks alone is the one who has been rejected. You heard it from teachers who rewarded group projects, from parents who told you to play nicely with others, from every film where the loner eventually learns that love and friendship are the real power. The world romanticizes belonging, and maybe it should. For the average life, belonging is enough. For the ordinary path, the comfortable path, the one that never demands too much of you, belonging is sufficient fuel. But you are not here because you want the ordinary path. You're here because something broke you open, because something ripped away the belonging you had and left you standing in a field with nothing but your own mind for company. And instead of running from it, something in you, some stubborn, unkillable part of you leaned in. That instinct is not failure. That instinct is ancient. It is the instinct of every person who ever built something the world wasn't ready for. Machiavelli knew this. A man who spent his life studying power, who watched princes rise and fall, who observed armies and betrayals and political theater up close, wrote in exile. Stripped of his position, stripped of his community, stripped of his relevance. And in that exile, in that loneliness, he wrote The Prince. The most influential political document in Western civilization was not born in a palace surrounded by advisors. It was born in isolation. Let that sit with you as you stick around and discover the truth about why isolation creates unstoppable individuals that will forever transform the way you perceive life. Chapter 2. The Forge. What solitude actually does to a mind. You don't understand what silence does to you until you've been forced to live inside it. Most people run from silence. They fill every moment music, conversation, noise, content, distraction, not because they are weak, but because silence asks something from you that noise never does. Silence asks you to be present with yourself. And most people are terrified of what they'll find there. When the crowd disappears, when the validation dries up, when the applause stops, when the group chat goes cold, you are left with the one person who has been waiting your entire life to have your full attention. You. And this is where the transformation begins. Not in therapy, not in a motivational seminar, not in the words of someone who loves you too much to be honest. The transformation begins the moment you stop running from your own company and start treating it as the most important relationship of your life. Because here is what isolation does that no one tells you. It strips away the performed version of you. Every day that you spend in community, you are also spending energy on performance. You are managing how you appear. You are calibrating your words based on the room. You are editing yourself sometimes consciously, often not to fit the expectations of the people around you. And that performance is exhausting. It is a constant, low-grade drain on your attention, your creativity, your clarity. When the audience disappears, the performance ends. And what's left raw, unfiltered, sometimes frightening, is the actual you. The real thoughts, the real fears, the real ambitions that you've never said out loud because you were worried how they'd sound. Machiavelli wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." He wasn't writing about other people. He was writing about your relationship with yourself. When you are alone, you cannot lie to yourself as easily. The mirrors are gone, the audience has left, and you are finally forced to look at what you're actually made of. Not the story you've been telling people, the truth underneath it. That confrontation is terrifying. It is also the beginning of real power. Chapter 3. The Wolves and the Sheep, a history written in solitude. Listen carefully, because history has been edited. Every great name you have ever been given as inspiration, every figure held up as an example of human potential, spent significant time alone. Not metaphorically, not briefly, profoundly, painfully, productively alone. Newton developed his theory of gravity during a plague quarantine, exiled from Cambridge, left alone with apples and equations and a mind that needed no audience to work. Darwin spent 5 years on a ship with no social world he recognized, observing, thinking, writing, and then 20 more years refining his ideas in solitude before publishing. 20 years. Can you imagine the discipline that required? Nikola Tesla, one of the most innovative minds in human history, died alone in a hotel room with pigeons as his closest companions. His biographers were careful to note this as tragedy. But his journals tell a different story. His notebooks from his most isolated years are electric. The ideas crackle off the page. The loneliness didn't diminish him. It concentrated him. Frederick Douglass, who had every reason to seek community after escaping slavery, wrote his autobiography in isolation. He sat alone with the horror of what he had lived through and turned it into language that changed a nation. These are not stories about people who found power despite their isolation. These are stories about people who found power because of it. The world teaches you that isolation is a symptom of failure. History teaches you that isolation is a prerequisite for a certain kind of greatness. And right now, in your quiet, in your solitude, in the stillness that feels like abandonment, you are in exactly the company of those names. The question is not whether you can survive this. The question is what you will build while you're here. If you've stayed with us to this point and found value in this video, we genuinely love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your support and feedback help keep these videos going and make future content better. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to Mind's Goals and join us for more meaningful conversations that can shift the way you see life. Chapter 4. The Enemies Within. The war you are actually fighting. Here is the part that no one wants to say out loud. The hardest battle of your life is not against circumstances. It is not against the people who left you. It is not against the market, the system, the timing, the luck you didn't have. The hardest battle of your life is against the version of you that wants to go back to being comfortable. That version of you is intelligent. It is patient. It speaks in reasonable voices. It says things like, maybe you're taking this too far. Maybe you should reach out. Maybe isolation isn't healthy. Maybe you should stop pushing so hard and just relax into a normal life. That voice is not your friend. That voice is the voice of every dream that was ever abandoned halfway through. It is the voice that convinced talented people to stop short of the thing they were actually capable of. It is the voice that promises comfort and delivers mediocrity. Machiavelli called this the internal enemy, the part of a prince's court that desires ease over excellence. He wrote that the greatest threat to any ruler was not the armies outside the gate, but the advisors inside who counseled retreat. You have those advisors too. They live in the part of your mind that flinches when discipline is required, in the part that reaches for distraction when clarity is close, in the part that mistakes company for comfort and mistakes comfort for progress. The lone wolf strategy is not romantic. It is not poetic. It is not a lifestyle choice to be curated for social media. It is a decision to go to war with yourself and to refuse any ceasefire until you have become someone you actually respect. That war happens in silence. That war happens when no one is watching. That war happens at 5 a.m. when the alarm goes off and the warm bed says stay and something in you says not today. You cannot win that war in a crowd. The crowd gives you too many places to hide. Chapter 5. The Discipline of One. The Architecture of an Unstoppable Mind. Let's talk about what you're actually building. Because this is not a romantic descent into hermitage. This is not about burning bridges or performing stoicism or curating a mysterious persona. This is about a specific, deliberate architecture, a way of structuring your inner world that makes you genuinely, measurably, undeniably harder to defeat. The first stone of that architecture is ruthless self-awareness. When you are alone, truly alone, not scrolling, not distracted, not numbing, you begin to see yourself clearly for the first time. You see your patterns. You see where your discipline collapses. You see the stories you tell yourself to excuse the behavior that holds you back. You see, perhaps for the first time, the gap between who you say you are and who you actually are in the dark. When no one is watching, most people never see this gap clearly, because most people are never alone enough to look. The second stone is the compounding of small actions. When validation disappears, when there's no one to impress, no one to perform for, no audience for your effort, something interesting happens. You stop doing things for the reaction and start doing them for the outcome. You work out not for the compliment. You read not for the conversation topic. You practice not for the performance. You build not for the praise. An effort that is stripped of performance becomes pure, more sustained, less fragile, because it doesn't need anything back. It just needs to be done. The third stone is the clarification of purpose. In community, purpose gets diluted by input. Everyone has an opinion about what you should do, what you should want, what path makes sense. And slowly, without realizing it, you start shaping your purpose around what other people can understand. Alone, that stops. Alone, you are forced to ask, what do I actually want? Not what sounds impressive, not what would make them proud. What do I want the real want? The one underneath all the performance? That question, answered honestly, is the most dangerous thing a person can discover. Because once you know what you actually want, it becomes very difficult to accept anything less. Chapter 6, The Great Reveal. The truth about what isolation is really teaching you. You thought this was a story about being alone. It isn't. This is a story about meeting yourself, perhaps for the first time. Every person who walks through a period of deep solitude, real solitude, not chosen peace but forced aloneness, the kind that comes from loss and failure and the collapse of what you thought your life was. Every person who walks through that and comes out the other side reports the same thing. They say, I didn't know what I was capable of. Not because they discovered superpowers, not because isolation made them superhuman, but because the crowd, the noise, the opinions, the constant negotiation with other people's expectations had been obscuring a version of themselves that was there all along. Waiting, patient, quiet. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must know how to use both the man and the beast, the rules of civilization, and the raw power underneath them. He was not advocating cruelty, he was advocating wholeness. He was saying that a person who knows only the civilized, performed, crowd-approved version of themselves is dangerously incomplete. You needed to lose the crowd to find the part of yourself that doesn't need it. Not because you'll never want community again, not because this is permanent, not because the lone wolf strategy is a life sentence, but because you cannot offer anything real to other people until you know who you are without them. The people who re-enter the world after genuine solitude are different. They are quieter in social situations, not from shyness but from certainty. They don't need the room to validate them because they've already validated themselves. They don't bend under pressure because they've spent time learning exactly where they stand. They don't collapse when someone withdraws approval because they've learned to live and even thrive without it. They are, in the truest sense, free. And freedom, real freedom, the kind that doesn't depend on circumstances or other people's behavior, is the rarest and most powerful thing a human being can possess. Chapter 7, The Return. What you build comes back with you. The lone wolf does not stay alone forever. This is the part the story always skips. Darwin published, Newton taught, Douglas spoke to thousands. Machiavelli, even in exile, dedicated the prince to Lorenzo de' Medici, hoping to re-enter the world he'd been stripped from. The solitude was never the destination. The solitude was the preparation. And there is a profound difference between a person who chooses community from need and a person who chooses community from abundance. One person enters the room, hoping to be filled. The other enters already full, looking to contribute, to build, to connect from a place of genuine strength rather than disguised desperation. You have been in the forge. You have felt the heat that most people run from. And what is forged in fire comes out differently than what was put in. So here is what you take back with you when the time comes. You take back clarity, a specific, personal, hard-earned understanding of what you want and why, unclouded by other people's expectations. You take back discipline, the muscle memory of doing hard things in silence with no reward but the doing itself. You take back discernment, the ability to choose your community deliberately rather than default into it out of loneliness or habit. And you take back sovereignty, the quiet, unshakable knowledge that you can be alone and be okay, that your foundation is internal, that you are not a structure that collapses when the external support is removed. That knowledge changes everything about how you move through the world. Because a person who is not afraid to be alone cannot be controlled by the threat of abandonment. A person who is not afraid to be alone cannot be manipulated by the withdrawal of approval. A person who is not afraid to be alone is genuinely, profoundly, quietly dangerous to every force that relies on fear to maintain its power over them. And the world needs more of that kind of dangerous. You came here carrying something heavy. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was a failure that still has its hands around your throat. Maybe it was the specific, particular loneliness of realizing that the life you were living was not yours, that somewhere along the way, without noticing, you had started performing someone else's version of a successful existence. You came here carrying that. And this is what I want to leave you with. The wolves who changed history did not change it in committee. They did not change it by consensus. They did not wait for permission. They did not soften their vision to make it more palatable to people who could not yet see what they saw. They went alone into the thing that needed doing. And the loneliness wasn't the wound. The loneliness was the gift. Not the gift of suffering, not the gift of romantic isolation, but the gift of knowing yourself, completely knowing your edges, your depths, your actual capacity, the thing you were placed here to do, knowing that in a way that is only possible when the noise finally falls away. Machiavelli wrote from exile. Newton wrote in a plague. Every chapter of real human history was written by someone sitting alone with an idea the world wasn't ready for yet. You are sitting with yours. It is quiet now. That quiet is not empty. That quiet is full of you. And the you that survives this, the you that comes out the other side of this silence, having refused to shrink, having refused to run, having sat with the discomfort until it became clarity, that version of you is the one the world has been waiting for. Go build in silence. Return with something undeniable. The ones who mattered will recognize you. The ones who don't were never meant to.